I'm Jan McGree, and I moved to Duluth in 1999. And at the very time that I moved here, they were building the Safe Haven Resource Center right down the hill from my house. So it's like I've been engaged with Safe Haven as long as I've lived in Duluth. And for those of you who moved here, you understand it takes some time to get to being in Duluth and understanding it. And if you've been here forever, it's another whole world. Anyway, that's my world. So I worked with Brittany Robb, who is the director at Myers-Wilkins School. Before it was even Myers-Wilkins School, it was Grant School in an after-school program. And then a little while later, Brittany Robb turns out to be the new director at Safe Haven. And then I've worked with a couple of people who've been involved. The last person that we saw here was, I have to remember her name, Jackie Christensen. Another different spelling, so I have to get it right in my head. And she has moved on, and now we have Brittany, who I have just met in person, but we've been communicating. So I'm delighted to introduce Brittany, who is the outreach director, and she can tell you about what's going on there. And if there's time, I can tell you about how we're connected here right at UUCD. So take it away, Brittany.
Yes. All right. So yeah, Brittany Robb is our executive director. She is known as OGB, the original Brittany, and I'm Brittany 2.0. So if you ever hear us refer to each other that way, that is what that means. And this is actually my very first presentation for Safe Haven. So you guys are a bit of a, you're a practice for me. So if I'm not quite fully on with my script, if I'm reading a lot, I haven't figured out my spiel yet. But yeah, my name is Brittany Lind. I am the new community engagement coordinator for Safe Haven Shelter and Resource Center. You can do it. Go to the next. Okay. A little bit about me. I have a bachelor's degree in criminology and a minor in photography. I got them at UMD. I graduated in 2010. And although I'm not originally from Duluth, I did move here in 2005, which I'm pretty sure means I'm still a Duluthian. I've been here long enough. It's been 20 years now. I have had a variety of jobs throughout my time in Duluth, with the number one theme being local, and the second being music, arts, and also events. So a lot of people come up and they're like, you look familiar. Where do I know you from? And I'm like, well, I worked at Amazing Grace. I worked at the Electric Fetus at Northland Special Events, the Co-op. I also hosted the Duluth Local Show on The Current, which is, part of NPR. And most recently, I spent nearly 5 years at Downtown Duluth, formerly the Greater Downtown Council. And we were a staff of 3, so my face was kind of just always there. I am also a co-founder, producer, and music director for an unapologetically feminist festival called Femen Fest, which was, oh, no worries. Thank you. I can project more. I'll go in front of this since, yeah. So Femen Fest was an unapologetically feminist festival that we put on 2017, 2018, and 2019. It went on hiatus due to the pandemic, as most states did. However, we are bringing it back this September. So if you're interested in that. Nice. Yes, that is actually, that was when I emceed the 2019 Tampa Bay show. Oh. Yeah, I've talked in front of a lot of people before. I feel like most people weren't paying attention. It's more scary to talk in front of small groups than it is to do that. But yeah, enough about me. Let's talk about Safe Haven. Today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Safe Haven's history, in case you weren't aware, the basics of domestic violence, as well as what services Safe Haven offers, and ways that folks like you can help. All right. What slide is this? Before we begin, though, it's important to remember that because domestic violence is so prevalent in our society, assume that there are survivors among us. So while we're not going to go into any graphic details about DV, please remember to be mindful of your reactions, give yourself grace, and take care of yourself. Take care of yourself and respect those around you and your reactions as well. All right, so before Safe Haven, there was the Women's Coalition. And the Women's Coalition first opens its doors in March of 1978. And it was a grassroots response to the lack of resources available to women living in violent relationships. Before the opening of the shelter, there was no crisis line, there was no safe housing in Duluth available for battered women and children, there were no health services, there were no information services in the 7-county area of northeastern Minnesota. Now we do have those things. I actually have a sheet over there that tells you what services are available in each of the different counties, crisis line, and how you can reach that.
Would it be all right to actually go back to in front of the computer too for the online people?
Oh, you guys didn't want to just look at the wall? All right. Yeah. And the primary function of the Women's Coalition was basically to offer alternatives to women in abusive relationships and to assist them in setting and meeting goals in order to confront that abuse, whether that be just getting away from the situation, but how you can also heal after the situation. The current shelter was built in 1998. And in 2001, the coalition disbanded and became Safe Haven Shelter for Battered Women. And this mostly happened because basically the services that we offered got big enough that we couldn't simply be just a coalition. We had to become an actual legal entity. 8 years later, the Family Justice Center opened up. And the concept for this was basically to provide a one-stop shop for victims of domestic violence. It was a place where women could go to find all of the services that she would need without having to sort out childcare, transportation, and then having to wait a month to talk to someone. Yeah.
Where's the shelter?
The shelter itself is at an undisclosed location.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe so. Yeah. And it originally started as like a 16-bed house. And everyone lived collectively in that house on, I think it was on First Street.
Yeah.
Thank you. What? Yeah. So I actually am not sure. I have looked at I've done the history of Safe Haven. I've gone through all the training and all the documents, but I don't have the specifics about that yet.
Some people that get paid.
That would make sense.
Can't remember her name, but she was, no, Jean, not Jean, another one, and I know, what was that woman? You're to that place, who was that? You know, I wasn't here. That was, she was, instrumental in getting this, going, and, they actually had the first domestic violence response from the police in the country.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
To Russia to talk about. Yeah.
That's amazing. Is that part of the Duluth? Okay. Okay. Awesome. See, I'm learning new things. Again, I just started in November, like the day after the election. So, yeah. So I'm still just a baby Safe Haven. Well, in 2012, we did an entire rebrand and we went from being the Safe Haven Shelter for Battered Women to being the Safe Haven Shelter and Resource Center. And this name change happened mostly because there was a bit of a disconnect between the shelter, and then also what would become the resource center. So we kind of just combined them all together. We got a brand new look. We implemented the bird. Yeah, it's a very, it's pretty awesome, our bird. Let's see. And it basically allowed us to not only create that unity between the two sites, but it also gave us the opportunity to invent how we tell our story. Oops. Yeah, so in addition to the name change, Safe Haven adopted a new logo, the origami bird, and this signifies transformation from fear to freedom. Our agency continues to remain at both sites, the shelter, which is located at an undisclosed location in the hillside, and also the resource center, which is directly across from the courthouse. We, in 2013, I was about to say last year, it's no longer last year, year before last, 2013, we did a, oh, you're right.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, that was my intention. Figured I'd keep y'all on your toes. So 2020, we did a full shelter remodel, and we, upped our capacity. So now we can hold up to 45 individuals comfortably, but I believe actually if there were some sort of major crisis in our community, I think we could hold up to 60 folks. It also went from being more communal rooms to a bunch of different individual rooms. So while our guests, clients usually have a roommate, you're only looking at like one roommate, not like a room full of individuals.
Have children? Do they have a home?
Usually, yes. Families, if there's a family, they usually have like a room just to them. And we have various sizes to, accommodate those different needs. We are also fully gender inclusive, and we take pets, which a lot of shelters don't. But pets tend to be one of the reasons why people stay in violent situations. So we wanted to lessen that barrier. All right, so the impact and definitions of domestic violence. So domestic violence, now whether you call it domestic violence, domestic abuse, relationship violence, intimate partner violence, or dating violence, we're all talking about the same thing. It is the pattern of behavior used by one person to maintain power and control over another person in a relationship. Now, this could actually go from intimate relationships to familial relationships. They're all considered domestic violence. And domestic violence can affect anyone, regardless of their age, race, religion, nation of origin, education, sexual orientation, gender, or economic status. And not all domestic violence looks the same. A common misconception when it comes to DV is that there's some sort of a physical element that has to be required for it to be considered domestic violence, but that is actually not true. Other versions of domestic violence can include verbal abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, digital abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and even just gaslighting. Oh, yeah. So the definition is essentially where like their partner tries to manipulate their perception of reality by denying facts and actions that have actually happened. Yes, we do. We do indeed. They love to gaslight us. That's why it's not a healthy relationship. Yes, I actually have heard that before.
Not real gas.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the best descriptions of this sort of power and control relationship actually came right out of Duluth with the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project. So this is the power and control wheel. And this is a gender neutral version. The original one was very like female focused, but we now know and accept that not just women get abused, everyone does. So this is a visual diagram used to illustrate the various tactics that abusers employ to gain and maintain power over their partners in abusive relationships. And it highlights that the primary goal of the abuse is to control, and then the outer ring represents physical violence, and the inner ring showcases the more subtle, ongoing manipulative behavior, such as isolation and intimidation. So just a couple of very sad stats. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in their life. 1 in 7 men will, and nearly half of all trans and non-binary folks will. And this is a world estimation. I think it's 20 minutes for just the US alone. But every 10 minutes, 1 woman or girl is murdered by an intimate partner or a family member across the world. 24 people per minute are being physically abused in the US, and 1 in 15 children are exposed to domestic violence situations. And folks who experience intimate partner violence are not only at a risk for the physical consequences of violence behavior towards them, but also like an entire slew of additional health conditions. So some of the mental and emotional impacts are survivors of domestic violence are 3 times more likely to meet the criteria for PTSD, 2 times more likely to develop symptoms of depression, and 3 times more likely to develop a major depressive disorder, 2 times more likely to engage in self-harming behaviors, 3 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts, and 4 times more likely to attempt it, and 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, as opposed to folks who have never experienced it. Additional victim impact, just mental health is low self-esteem, fear and anxiety, depression, PTSD, and substance abuse. The physical consequences include traumatic injury, chronic physical health conditions, sexually transmitted infections, chronic pain, complications with pregnancy, and actually when a woman is pregnant, that is the most dangerous time in her life, because pregnant women are more likely to experience intimate partner violence than anyone else. Women are also more likely, 80% more likely to have a stroke if they've experienced domestic violence, 70% more likely to have heart disease, and 60% more likely to have asthma. And a lot of this comes from the fact that, honestly, trauma has such an incredible impact on our bodies. And I don't even go into what it does to your brain. It essentially will rewire your brain and make you react differently than you did before, because that's just what happens with trauma, no matter what kind of trauma it is. So why do they stay? There's a lot of reasons. It is common for survivors of domestic violence to experience a lot of uncertainty around the idea of ending a relationship with people causing them harm. Most survivors can think of good times in that relationship before the abusive behavior shows up, and survivors often love and care for their abuser and hope that the abuse will stop. They may have shared many years together, be married, or have children with that abusive partner, which adds yet another element of what do I do with the children? Legally, my partner has the right to see them. How do we go about this situation? Maybe it's easier if I just stay. And survivors may go back and forth between wanting to stay in the relationship and wanting to end it. And some survivors blame themselves for the abuse. That's part of the gaslighting aspect of it. I wouldn't have done this if you hadn't done that first, so it's your fault. Some survivors even blame themselves, or they feel, honestly, they feel embarrassed that they stayed to begin with, and now they no longer want to make that step because they're like, I don't know how to now go and leave them when I've stayed in this situation for so long. And it's important to remember that safety. When it comes to a survivor leaving their abusive relationship, they are at the most risk for their life during the process of leaving. And most survivors leave an average of 7 to 8 times before officially leaving. But a lot of those times in the attempt, they're killed. That's just kind of the sad fact of it. So what do we do as a shelter? So we house an average of 500 plus adults and children annually at our shelter. It is a 28-day emergency shelter. It used to be longer than 28 days, but there are some new legislation things that make it really murky, where if you're at a certain point, then you become a official resident of the location if it's longer than 28 days. But because we have good relationships with the other 2 shelters in the area, Kasda and Dabanugan, we have the ability to work together to make sure that we're not just like sending someone back to the abusive situation. During their shelter stay, they have basically all of their crucial needs met. They get meals, there's hygiene supplies, beds, linen, transportations. We offer safety planning and 911 phones, and we connect them with other community sources to help them in their journey past the situations that they have found themselves in. We also have a 24/7 crisis hotline that's answered by our advocates. That's the word I was looking for. And then we also have the Resource Center, which, as I said before, it was initially created with the idea that it would be an umbrella, a one-stop shop for domestic violence agencies and resources. So we offer legal advocacy, self-sufficiency programs, youth programming, support groups, and then we have a drop-in center. So depending on if you're not staying in shelter, but your living area or living situation is pretty precarious, we do offer showers and laundry. We even have a lounge where folks can just come in during the day and just kind of hang out. They have a safe space where they can go. We have snacks, we have beverages, like we're a nice, easy place to just get away from everything. We also, through the Resource Center, have connections to the other community organizations like Legal Aid, Two Rivers Counseling. We have a wonderful connection with them. So I think on Wednesdays, we have a counselor from there come in and people can like talk about how they're feeling, their trauma, and help getting to the next step in their healing. So for the legal advocacy, we obviously help with orders of protection and harassment restraining orders, law enforcement intervention. So anytime that there is actually a domestic violence situation in Duluth, we get faxed a copy of the police report along with the contact information as to like who the suspected survivor victim is, so that we can reach out and make sure that they know that they have resources. So we're not just leaving them or making it so that police have to try and make these connections, because depending on who the police officer is, they might not be very good at having those kind of conversations. We also offer safety planning. Like I said, leaving is one of the most dangerous times for a survivor. So we basically have kind of a template that we help them through. So in the event of you're wanting to leave, where do your pets go? Where do your children go? How do you take the steps in order to get out as safely as possible? So how do you get involved? Say you're like, hey, Safe Haven seems like a pretty cool organization. I would like to help out. There's a couple of different options. So we do things like this for community education. We also offer volunteer, interning, and work study opportunities. The thing that we need most at the shelter, honestly, is folks to serve meals. Like we have our advocates on staff and they're the ones who do it as a backup. But sometimes the phones are ringing. People are asking for advice, for help. And so the idea of being able to have a volunteer there that's just there to help serve meals is lovely. We're also getting more into events. As I said at the beginning of my thing, I'm an event gal. So I've started planning a lot more events. March is actually our 47th birthday month. We have 2 events planned. One is we are doing a awareness beer collaboration with Earthrider. It's going to be called a 1 in 4 beer because 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence. And they're also doing a roundup program for us in March. So every time you go there, you have the option to round up your tab, and that money is actually going to be split between the 3 shelters, Dabanugan, Kasda, and us. It's not really meant to be a money-making situation. We just wanted to raise awareness. There's also one on the 15th of March at Bent Paddle, and that will be a cell phone drive. So we take old cell phones, whether or not they're working, we send them to a company in Florida, and they send them back to us fixed as 911 phones. So we can pass them out at the resource center as well as at the shelter. So if you need a safety phone that your partner doesn't know about, you have something that's free that will always call 911. And of course, donations. And whether this is a in kind, a workplace drive, financial, or just corporate giving, like what we get from the community, especially considering how fun the government's been lately with our resources, and a lot of what we do, we get from resources from the community. And that is basically my program. That is my email down there, outreach@safehavenshelter.org. I couldn't be Brittany at safehavenshelter.org because there already is one. So I get to just be outreach. Are there any questions? Oh, yeah.
Isn't that one that was quite heavy? Anyway. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they did some good work, and I did some things with them. Back in the day.
And Jean, you're right, our congregation.
Of course, Jean,
Might be your.
I don't think.
Maybe she's online.
Yes.
Good.
Get out. Yeah.
Were you? Oh, yeah, go ahead. Well, yeah, I mean, it's different for every survivor, especially knowing that it takes 7 to 8 times of leaving before you're actually officially gone. And we do a variety of things that we connect with other community partners. We look into how they can get housing, where that can be. During the pandemic, we actually had sort of a temporary housing off-site of the shelter. We had the shelter, but then we had something else. And it allowed for stays to be longer than 28 days. And the goal is of being able to find the funding and the perfect location to be able to offer that. But in the meantime, we connect with our community partners to try and find, because housing is the #1 thing. We just need to get them to a safe place where they have a roof over their head. So, and there are other options for, you know, being able to go to therapy to work through that trauma. And there are a lot of success stories, even just in the short time that I've been here. I've had folks come up to me when I'm tabling at events and say, you helped me. I'm in such a better place. I have my own house. I have my own car. I have a job that's stable and I like it. And it's just, that is the ideal, is to get them to a place where they're safe and they can finally be happy in whatever situation they find themselves in. What?
I think you're magnificent. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
At the shelter?
It is always a possibility. We have strict confidentiality laws that we follow.
It's going on to people, and I don't know if that would be a concern.
They are legally not allowed to enter the shelter. Yeah, well, then we call the police. We haven't had that situation happen here, but as it is in our operations that people can call as much as they want. We will not give them any information. ICE is not allowed to enter our place, even federal law, like we are protected by federal law at the moment.
Yeah.
So I guess we never really know what's going to happen next, but
And because churches are no longer sanctuaries for ICE, they can come into churches and they can come into schools.
in
And hospitals.
hospitals.
So it's a huge concern of anybody.
Yeah.
It's scary and we need some sort of plan from churches to combat that.
I agree. And
That's a great plan. I mean, I'll get migrant justice group.
Oh.
That's it, yeah.
Oh.
They've been around for-
Aren't they gonna do the thing
Penny's-
today?
Penny's Cricket's right up.
Isn't there gonna be a talk by Wednesday?
Not today.
Oh,
well, that's good to know.
Could you explain who your partners are, and how you work together? I mean, are you ever in any competition for funding, or do you work together? Obviously.
So we have very specific funding. Most of our funding comes from the Department of Justice. 80% of my pay comes straight from Department of Justice funding, which is, however, though, what they tried to cut off earlier this week and then removed it. So we'll see how that goes. But in regards to what kind of funding we have, there are grants and stuff like that are usually very specific as to what that grant money goes for. So while we have housing partners throughout the community, we wouldn't qualify for the same grants. And so there's not really a lot of competition with that. There may be some competition between the different shelters, but CAS does in Wisconsin, so state funding would be different. I don't know what the federal funding situation would be in comparison. And then Dabanugan is part of ACO. So they have their own kind of funding that also comes out of that. But I'm guessing we share a lot of the same funding sources. In my short time at Safe Haven, it seems like we tend to be significantly more outgoing when it comes to being like publicity, which is why when I set up that collab with Earthrider, I made a specific point to say that I just got the details figured out on Friday. So I haven't reached out to them yet, but I told my boss, OGB, that it wouldn't be a money-making situation. I'm like, I want it to be awareness, and I want to include both CASDA and Dabanugan together in it, because I think it's important, especially at this point in time. Like, yes, we're all fighting for the same kind of funding and resources in the community. However, it's an awareness beer. We're all working towards the same thing. I think we should all be involved in this kind of event.
I know from Rihanna, April, that they always have a waiting, long waiting list for their shelters, and that may be
Yeah.
one reason they're not publicized. I know they're
Yeah.
building more right now, but it makes me think of that. I'm wondering, are a lot of the people who come to Safe Haven, people who have been vulnerable almost since childhood to different kinds of abuse or lack of opportunity?
Yeah,
Because I think that is true.
it is. Obviously, doesn't matter what your economic status is. There are people who are very wealthy who are also in domestic violence situations, but obviously those in minority positions, both economically and as well as race-wise, are more at risk. And that's just because lack of resources. But I was recently talking to our training coordinator, Victoria, and she said that it's a little bit of a overwhelming to think of the fact that when she first started 7 years ago, she knew some folks as children who would come into the shelter with their mom, and now she sees them as adults coming into the shelter, also experiencing domestic intimate partner violence with their partner after having lived that experience as a child with their parents. So it's just the cycle of abuse. It's pretty common. And it's unfortunate that it is a lot of the same folks over and over again.
Well, there's research that compared Holocaust survivors and Holocaust survivors that actually the trauma altered their genes,
Mhm.
passed it on to their children.
Yes.
So that makes sense.
Yeah, it's very.
Repeat that.
Oh, yeah. So it's basically like a generational trauma that is, it tends to just be like imprinted in our genes. And when you go through that kind of trauma, so if you experience a really intense childhood, and even if you got over it as an adult, or if you lived that entire life when they had children, a lot of times those children have the same sort of reflexes of being afraid, and whether or not they themselves have experienced trauma, they act as if they have because it's genetic. Mhm.
They say,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, excuse me, but I think we probably need to start thinking about next week, and also I wanted to make a few comments. Brett, what is going on next week for the forum? What? Oh,
Yeah,
News to me. Thank you.
yeah.
what,
So there's a forum after church. Interfaith Committee for Migrant Justice.
okay, there's a forum after church
Yeah.
for interfaith migrant justice. Okay, okay, thank you. I was just gonna say that I have served lunch at Safe Haven for years, 1 day a week, and I've done it with other people from this congregation. It's just a matter of going down and opening up food that's already been cooked and brought in from another location and giving people what they want out of that, the amount they want, whatever, because they try to keep the residents out of the kitchen itself. So it is, it's just, and it's a great way to be involved and also to get a little bit of insight into actually how these things work. So it's good for younger people to do. I'm sort of past being able to do that, but I did it and I loved it. So anyway, you can go next. Brett.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, I mean, before anything else, just a big round of applause. Just join Jan and I, and thank you, Brittany. I know that we have a lot of online attendees here too, and just thank you for all of that you and your whole organization do for our community. Feel free after the presentation to hang out. We don't have service for another 15. But next week on Sunday, we will have a quarterly board report. So Rosemary, our treasurer, will be here and we'll have a chance to ask any questions about finances. And if you do have questions about migrant justice and some of the interfaith work that's been going on, we have forums the next 2 weeks after that. But it sounds like even after the service today, there's initial discussions too. So you're welcome to tune into any of those areas. And those are the big updates from my end. I'll give you the final word, Brittany.
Yeah, I think my final word is going to be over here with the material that I brought. So again, I have a sheet that is called Domestic Violence and Services. I've got some copies of this. I can also send you the file.
I want to show it online.
He's just showing the sheet here.
Okay.
Oh, you're good. Yeah.
Okay. No worries. No worries. Yeah, there's an online audience. So yes, this sheet has all of the domestic violence resources in the Northland. Very helpful. This is our general brochure that kind of breaks down what we do. And then I brought a couple of these, which I absolutely adore these. I recommend keeping them on your person. So it is a small token that has our bird on it, but on the back is our 24/7 crisis line. And when I table events, I put them right at the edge of the table so people can grab them discreetly. And usually all of them are gone by the end of my tabling event. We also have staff who finds them in bathrooms, like because people stash them places so that anyone who might need our services can grab it. And it's much more sturdy than just like grabbing a little tab of paper off of a poster. So I have some of these. If you end up going through them all, I almost always have one on my person just in case I come across someone who might need it. I can just like slip it to them, and then they have access to the resources right there. But if you need more, feel free to ask. And that is it. Yeah.
Thank you.